Hello everyone, my name is Cameron Stevens and I'm a local real estate agent here in Los Angeles, and I want to go over today basically the most common thing that I get asked right early on in the process when somebody approaches me and they say, looking to buy my first house, what's one of the very first steps? What do I got to do to get the ball rolling? And well, the biggest thing is to actually get pre-approved for a loan. The way I like to say that is, you have a budget in mind. I can probably help you estimate a budget, but unless you have all cash to purchase a property, the person with the final say is the one that's lending you the money. So that would be the lender. They're the ones that actually tell you specifically how much you are pre-approved for. So let's talk really high level about the pre-approval process. The first thing that's worth noting is that pre-approval is different than a pre-qualification. Pre-qualification is something that's very high level. Many times it doesn't include submitting any documentation whatsoever. It's just sort of like that, that testing ground. It is not a commitment to lend. And that's actually the most important difference, because you cannot submit an offer to purchase property without a pre-approval letter, because a pre-approval letter is something from a lender that says, I'm putting in writing my commitment to lend to this person, and in many instances to lend to this person on this property. So the next question is, where do you even go to find a lender to get pre-approved? One of the most important things I can do is to help guide people in the right direction as to where you should actually be looking for a loan. So I'm going to go over the three different categories basically that I always recommend to first-time home buyers. And I'm going to rank them, kind of put them in order of how I usually suggest most people go about looking into these. The first one is your big bank. So that's gonna be Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase, yada, yada. Whoever you bank with, whoever you have likely a checking account or maybe even a savings account with, these are, I would call good, but not my favorite lenders. They do work. I mean, I've closed deals with Bank of America, I've closed deals with Wells Fargo. They do a fine job. Here's the issue. Big banks aren't really set up for home loans. And what I mean by that is they really have a pretty strict criteria. Like, you need to have pretty much salary, W-2, and buying a pretty standard house that is not in need of a lot of repairs. It really needs to kind of be super by the books. They're just not really set up to be as flexible with different types of income. They're not set up to be flexible with different types of, maybe a duplex or a triplex or a house that needs a bit of work or even a lot of work. They really want your kind of stereotypical standard salaried worker getting into an updated single family home. Now, if this fits your criteria, they're fine. And sometimes they can actually have great rates. One of the instances where I do recommend people go with their big bank is if you have a significant portion of your assets with that bank. So for example, if you say you have an investment fund with Wells Fargo or something like that, if you do have a significant portion of your assets with one particular bank, many of them actually offer programs where they will give you a reduced interest rate. And they also have other types of programs where you can basically submit an all cash offer by borrowing against your portfolio. So what they basically do is they front the money for the all cash purchase, and then right after the close of escrow, they take out a loan to refinance it back. So it's actually a situation where, even though it's not technically an all cash offer, ultimately after the fact, it can act as an all cash offer, which means you can waive loan, waive appraisal, and pretty effectively compete. So those are actually instances where I do like the big banks. The problems that you run into, again, they're really not set up for anything besides conventional loans. And you kind of run into situations where, like, maybe the loan officer is in the Midwest and your underwriter is in New York and somebody else is up in San Francisco. So it's like a bunch of different time zones coordinating, and everyone's trying to send documents here or there, and they just tend to be really slow. If you use a big bank, you're not closing early. It's just not happening. So the second place that I recommend people look are credit unions. Now, there's two sort of instances for this. One of them is credit unions that are associated with your workplace. I used to work in the film industry. There were a lot of different credit unions that specifically service the film industry, and I love those. I love those for two reasons. One, if you work in that particular industry, they already know what you do, what you make, how stable you are in your employment. So getting pre-approved is usually pretty simple. They just know the industry that they're serving. Second of all, credit unions are smaller. They're more lean. They can usually offer very competitive interest rates, and they have the human factor as well. Most of the time, the credit unions are based locally, either partially locally or entirely locally. So there's usually somebody associated where you can pick the phone, you can call them, you can chat through different aspects of your loan, different rates, whether you want to pay points and when the return on that investment will be, what's the break-even point. These are the types of questions where it's really, really good to have a person to speak to. Again, you can kind of imagine if you've got your big bank, you're probably sitting on hold and talking to somebody that's just not the area of expertise. Yeah, credit unions are great for this, especially if you already have an account with them that you like. So I always recommend, one, checking in to see if your employer has relationships with any kind of credit union, and two, what are the local credit unions where you live? There's a lot in Los Angeles, and I can certainly help kind of guide in that direction. The final one is the one that I generally recommend people to the most, and I always kind of recommend you at least try this option as well, and that's working with a local lender. There are many different reasons why I really, really like this option, but one of them is actually it's just as good, if not better, than the credit union in terms of the customer service. I mean, I used to be able to say that it's somebody that you can go and sit down with in person and really chat through. At the moment, due to coronavirus, that's not happening, but it's people that are picking up the phone, and at some point we'll get to a place where yes, you can go back and sit down with them in person, go over all of the details of your loan, ask questions, have that back and forth dialogue. It's something that is really, really, really helpful. Another reason why I like working with local lenders is because listing agents like local lenders. Listing agents know that if you're working with somebody local to LA, then that is also going to be somebody who's going to be on top of the process. They're going to make things work. They're not going to be delayed. They're in the same time zone. Many instances, they might even know that lender, and so they trust that lender. And, in some instances where a listing agent might say, I've never heard of this person. Can you please get cross-qualified? They might go, oh yeah, hey, look, everything looks good. Worked with this lender before with other, situations. I like that. You're good to go. So it can actually be a major selling point on your offer to work with a local lender. And the other thing that I like about working with local lenders is many instances, they will both originate and broker loans. Now, why do I like that? Because you have options. They might go ahead and if the situation fits, they might just go ahead and originate the loans themselves. They might say, hey, it's actually going to be better and cheaper for you to go with this particular loan product. They're the ones that have relationships with a lot of different lenders, so they can very easily work out different types of situations depending on what you have going on and find you something that's better than they can do on their own. And speaking of kind of working with different situations, that's one of the reasons that I like working with local lenders. They aren't immediately going to say, oh, you're not salaried, you're out the door. They're going to say, oh, okay, so maybe you work in the film industry. Maybe you have, commission income. Maybe you've got non-traditional 1099, independent contractor type income. They're not going to immediately turn anybody down. They're just basically like, okay, great. I'm going to be able to work with you. Let's figure out the situation to actually get you pre-approved. And in many instances, local lenders can actually go ahead and cut down appraisal times as well. They're not sitting around waiting for a lot of people to make a lot of different calls. And many times they can actually get the appraisal out and done soon. That's not to say that any of these other ones can't do that as well. I've just personally had more success when people use some type of a local lender. I have relationships with multiple different local lenders. I have one in particular that I really, really like that I do often recommend first. So that is definitely one of those first key things where it's like, okay, you decided, maybe even you started looking online a little bit, but you're like, hey, I'm ready to get a little bit more serious about this. These are the types of things that you're going to be looking for in that pre-approval process. Now, I will say this as a sort of a parting note, because the question I get asked all the time is, I'm just kind of starting the search. We're kind of probably 6 months, maybe even a full year out. Probably shouldn't get pre-approved yet, right? And the answer is not necessarily. So pre-approvals, usually when you actually just get one in particular, they're going to last you about 60 to 90 days. But at that 60 to 90 day mark, if you didn't purchase a home during that time, they're just going to check rates. And as long as nothing has changed about your work situation and your income situation, they'll have all of the documents just on file. So they'll just say, hey, here's a new pre-approval. It's based on where rates are right at the moment. Keep going. So I like to say, hey, if you're like 3 months out, it's probably a good time to kind of start doing that, just because, again, you don't want to really be backpedaling. Like, you don't want to say, oh, we're 6 months out, and in month 2 or something like that, you find something you're like, oh boy, this is it. This is the one. We have to make an offer. I totally love this. What do we do? I don't want people to, I like to avoid putting people in a situation where like, oh boy, we got to get a pre-approval letter immediately because the offer deadline is in 2 days and everyone's scrambling and it's super stressful, and that's happened more times than I try to avoid it. It's just a good idea. So there you go. There's a very high level look on different types of lenders. At the end of the day, you can get a loan to go through with really anybody. It's just sort of about what is best for you personally, and just sort of how can you be strategic about it so it puts you in the best position possible. So there you go. If you found this information useful, please share, ask questions, reach out. My email and phone number are always in like every single one of my posts. So there you go. Thanks for listening.